Good morning. It's 7 a.m. Thursday morning in Berlin and in Europe, or continental Europe. And it's a very unusual, but it's Space Café time. So our Space Café Law Breakfast with Steven Freeland will begin very soon. Thanks for joining us for our breakfast roundtable today. As you can see, this wonderful picnic area where we come together. So you will hear about it in a bit. And as always, we appreciate your feedback and of course, your participation. I'm Torsten Kriening. I'm your co-host. I'm your tired co-host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. And we are a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I would like to thank all our private or corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, the bi-weekly and the daily newsletters, and our Space Café podcast. The latest one with Kevin O'Connell, the retired director of the US Department of Commerce. It's very interesting. It's very timely for our conversation we will have today. We also have new, very exciting episodes on the Space Café Radio, so the short-form podcast, and the latest episodes are in German, dedicated to the Ila Air Show from last year with special guests like Günther Hasinger, Thomas Grübler, Stefan Fischer, Sebastian Fischer, and more. And today we will release then Matthias Maurer, our astronaut, and furthermore. So don't miss them when you speak German. Otherwise, we have a full program in English as well. And our fan shop is open for you. It's always open because it's on our website, and you're just a click away to become a real space watcher. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the event section and on YouTube, and we will host our Space Café Law Breakfast with Steven Freeland live on a bi-monthly base, but there will be some exception with the next one. But stay tuned till the end to hear what will happen in March. And with that, I'm handing over to your host today, Professor Steven Freeland in sunny Australia and sunny Sydney on this very special day. Steven, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Torsten. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and in Skip's case, good night to everyone. Thanks for joining us on this, as Torsten said, very special day, and we'll hear about that in a minute. For what is now our 12th, I believe, Space Café Law Breakfast. Thank you so much for keep coming back, and we just have so many interesting discussions, and today is no exception. We've got two wonderful people, dear friends, but also really amazing and interesting people with great expertise. We'll be focusing a lot on different aspects of space law today, mainly around the commercial sector, which is, of course, vital. But all of that to come. As everybody knows, and Torsten mentioned, we're in a very special place today, and as everybody knows, each Space Café Law Breakfast, we have breakfast together in a different location around the world. Today is no exception. We're in a really special place, and Deepika and Skip, I'll introduce you both formally in a minute, but Deepika, tell us where we are and why, and hello.
Hi, Steven, and hi to everybody at home, especially for the early birds. Today is a special day. India celebrates its 74th Republic Day. In 1950, on this day is when the Constitution of India came into force, giving us the identity of a republic separate from the British Raj. So this day is marked with a lot of colorful and ceremonious parades at New Delhi, the nation's capital, as well as all the state capitals in the country. And on this sunny, warm 28-degree heat, let's say, if we could call it that, we are sitting in a terrace across a building that is as historic as the day. And we are sipping on some Chennai-made filter coffee in this special cup. Not a saucer, but another cup. So this building that you see behind us, it's the Madras High Court. It's one of the 3 high courts established in colonial India by letters patent that were granted by Queen Victoria in 1862. So apart from its historical qualities, it's also known for its architectural qualities. I've had the pleasure of representing cases in courtrooms that have beautiful painted ceilings and stained glass windows and so on. So on this day, I wanted to share one of my favorite places in Chennai with the rest of you here.
Oh, thank you. And it's an honor for all of us to be here. I don't know what the right greeting is, but let's say Happy Republic Day to you and all of your compatriots. And thank you for inviting us here. So, as I said, today we've got Deepika and Skip, commercial lawyers extraordinaire, and we're going to look at the commercial space sector and ask some difficult, penetrating questions, and I'm sure we'll get some great answers. How does commercial space law, for example, contribute to the exploration and use of outer space? What are the necessary skills that a commercial space lawyer should have? How do commercial space contracts work? How are they fit for purpose? What are their unique features which makes commercial space really interesting and challenging, particularly when you're doing something for the first time? What's the role of national law in the promotion of commercial space, and what challenges arise for all of us as space is becoming increasingly commercialized? So we've got 2 people who can help us with all of that and a lot more. We'll encourage you, of course, to ask questions of them. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have subject expertise on the floor. And of course, we've got my dear friend and colleague, Torsten, who will, of course, provide us with his reality check. But let me first introduce our special guests, our experts. We've got Skip Smith, dear friend. Hi, Skip. Skip leads the aerospace practice group at the Denver-based law firm of Sherman and Howard. He's had 40 years plus experience in the aerospace industry. He represents clients from nearly every segment of the industry: large companies, startup ventures, manufacturers, launch service providers. He's helped both the US and international clients on all sorts of legal matters relating to the complete lifespan of a space mission, from the planning, purchasing, operation, insurance, government contracting, regulatory issues, etc. He's got the best job in the world because he's often called to do first of its kind projects. For example, he's recently, and we'll ask him about this later, represented one of the private astronauts on the recent Axiom mission to the ISS, which is the first all-commercial mission to the ISS. He graduated from the Air Force Academy, George Washington University. He's got a doctorate from McGill. He's a former US JAG. He's had leadership positions in Air Force Space Command. He's done everything. And Skip, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. And then we've got Deepika, who you've already heard from, Deepika Jeyakodi, another dear friend. She's a member of the IISL. She's a senior commercial contracts officer at Airbus Defence and Space, based in Leiden in the Netherlands, although today she's back in Chennai. She works on a whole range of interdisciplinary teams on contracts, collaborations, IP, property, innovation, marketing, everything to do with all of those things around space activities and space operations. She's also the founder of CHEER, which is a human rights-based NGO based in India. She's practiced law, as we heard, in the wonderful Madras High Court, where we are today. She's authored books on cybersecurity, on contract design, on innovation. She's got an LLM from Leiden, an LLM also from Madras University, Diploma of Intellectual Property, and BA and BL from Tyndall University in Chennai. And she's also attended the ISU's Space Studies program. So they're great. It's just so good to have you both. Welcome. Okay, so let's get started. Our next tradition, of course, is that one word that everybody wants to know. We ask all of our guests, if you had one word to describe space, the wonders of space, space law, what would it be? Torsten's put up on the screen what we've had in the past. You can see I said intergenerational, and my dear friend Torsten said ambiguous. But we've had lots and lots of different words. Let's see where we are today. So Skip, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I know it's an ungodly time for you, and it's your wife's birthday and all of that, but thanks for joining us. Skip, welcome. How would we describe space in one word?
Well, my word is inspiration, and I see that Cayuve took inspiring. So we're pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
But whichever version you use, I think space is inspirational. I can say personally, I was inspired by space. I went to the Air Force Academy because I wanted to be an astronaut. And I watched Neil Armstrong land on the moon, and it was very inspiring. I think it's inspiring to children, to adults, to many people from all different countries, all different backgrounds. And so I was inspired to be an astronaut. That didn't work out, but now I'm a space lawyer and I get to represent astronauts. So it's very inspiring.
And so are you, Skip, I have to say, because all the work you've done, for example, with the moot court in the IISL, you've inspired so many people. So I think you're taking your descriptor to heart. So thank you. And inspirational is a great word. Deepika, you have taken a slightly different direction, I think, on your word. So what's your one word for space?
My one word is caution. It's quite different from all the positive, colorful words that I see up on the screen. I would have definitely gone with the inspiring and infinite and so on as well. But the word that's closest to the work that I do and the values that I believe in is caution. And the reason why I picked this is because I find that we have been and we are currently at an intersection where there are so many differing interests that are colliding, whether it's talking about public and private interests, the interests of, let's say, space superpowers, spacefaring nations, and future spacefaring nations, as I would like to call them, or having to look into diversity and inclusion in our industry. So when we are at the flux of all of these things, I think the one word that we should always bear in mind, at least personally for me, is caution, finding the right balance between all of this, and not just looking at the stars, but also looking around us to see how we can best benefit from space.
Oh, thanks, Deepika. You could be our second reality check as well, because I think that's a really, if I may use the pun, cautionary tale for us at all. You know, we hear so much good news and excitement about the inspirational side of space, but as you say, you know, we've got to maximize the benefits but minimize the risks. So we have to be cautious in how we proceed. So thank you both.
Steven, short veto on a second reality check. I'm not sure if a space lawyer or a lawyer can be a reality check.
Yeah, are you saying an unreality? Are you saying an unreality check? Eh? Well, you can see where Torsten stands on space lawyers. Okay, let's get started. As everybody's aware, you know, commercial space is everywhere now. Already in the mid-1990s, the commercial space overtook government space in terms of the dollar value of space. And we now have a $430 billion space industry. It's growing. It's projected to be in the trillions by 2040. So commercial space is everywhere. We need to have commercial law, commercial space law, commercial contracts, commercial lawyers. So Skip, can you start us off? Can you perhaps put this in context? Describe, if you could, in general terms, how commercial space law fits into the broader picture of international governance of space activities. What do you think the role of the commercial space lawyer is, and why do we need commercial contracts? And that would be useful if you could put that in context for us based on your experience.
Sure. Well, international law is very important to commercial space law. And you start with the Outer Space Treaty, you start with Article 6, states are internationally responsible for the activities of their commercial entities. So you have that international law driving the national law and the commercial law. And commercial lawyers need to understand that broader context, the international context, the national context, and then the contracts that we're hammering out, for all the different commercial activities. The contracts are really the kind of the foundation for commercial space law, but you have to have the context. You have to have the international space law, the national space law, and then getting into the commercial contracts that are really the nitty-gritty, for commercial activities.
Yeah, and there's so many unique features in commercial contracts, aren't there? We'll come to some of those that make it different. You can't just copy-paste, if you like, a terrestrial contract, white out computer system and put in space system and use that. So the role's important, isn't it? Deepika, so you've heard about Skip, talk about contractual principles. We're going to look at some of that, but I'm interested in who and what is a space lawyer? What sort of skills do they need? I'm often talking about all lawyers, all law students need to have some degree of what we call space literacy. Space is relevant to every mode of operation. It's all over. We need to educate students for the challenges of the 21st century. Those challenges will come in the form of technology, space technology being part of it. So if you were looking to hire or find or educate potential space lawyers or lawyers generally, what would you look for in them? What sort of skills do you think they need to have?
I definitely agree with you that there's some amount of space literacy that's necessary. But I've also worked with a few young graduates who get nervous talking about, I don't know enough about Star Wars and Star Trek or popular fiction. And you don't have to be that person who knows everything about space. I think what's special about our industry is a lot of people are enthusiastic. They're willing to share their information, knowledge, what they're working on about. So you need to be open to the knowledge that other people are willing to give in. Especially as a lawyer, we need a lot of context. And just as Skip said, it's about understanding the national, international, and any other applicable laws and regulations and so on, but also the non-law context. So a good understanding of why we take certain policy decisions, what sort of impact does your economy or your societal needs have on the activities that you do. That's something that's quite important. And I think that's what sets a good space lawyer apart from another. I think if I have to zero that down to one asset that these lawyers need to have, it would be the ability to connect the dots. Space is different things to different people. So we have an edge the minute we connect these different dots, understanding what's around us, and not just focusing on, okay, this is the law, this is the regulation, I'm going to follow this to the letter. I think the ability to learn about the industry, but also challenge it when it's needed, that's something that's very important.
That's interesting. I often think about the language we use too. We lawyers, whatever, both of you, Skip and Deepika, you need to speak to technical people all the time, right? Not only do you need to have a basis of some technical expertise, but you've got to find a common language. Skip, do you struggle sometimes talking to engineers or technical people, finding that common language?
I think I probably struggled earlier on. I've been around long enough, for decades in the aerospace industry. So I've picked up the lingo, and I can remember when I was a student at the Air Force Academy using my slide rule to calculate orbits to the moon in my, in my engineering classes. So, but I do tell the youngsters, when I teach or when, I'm just talking to somebody young who's interested in getting into this, you've got to understand the industry and understanding in it, the nomenclature of the industry, the way they talk is part of understanding the industry.
Yeah. Deepika, what about you? I mean, you at Airbus, no doubt, would have to deal with specifications and technical stuff that comes from engineers, and then they say, Deepika, look, could you convert this into a legal contract, right? And, so there's an educative process for you to understand how they write, but I suppose you need to educate the technical people how to write in a way that can be translated into commercial contract. Does that make sense, or how difficult is that?
To answer your earlier question first, I definitely struggled when I first started at the industry because the acronyms, people just speak in acronyms, and you can get lost in all of these alphabets that are just thrown at you at meetings. But it's amazing to work with engineers because they are black and white, they are output oriented. They're very clear in what they need to achieve, and they're open to, I'm generalizing, of course, but they're open to telling you that, okay, I need a solution for this particular problem. Please do something about it. And about speaking the language and educating each other, I don't think it's just me educating someone or the engineer educating me. It goes both ways. We are a team, and we have to make this work. So over the years, at least with the Dutch team, what we've tried to do is find ways in which we can collect inputs for our contracts. So if we want a team to work with certain export control provisions, for instance, we would tell them, hey, let us know what sort of technical information you're handling. Tell us why this is sensitive, or is this publicly available information? These are things that me as a lawyer, no matter how much I read about export control law, these are things that I would never understand. So once we give them the way in which they need to communicate these inputs to us, our job is made easy for, let's say, filing compliance elements or transferring this into a contract and so on. So I would say it goes both ways. We learn from each other in this process.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So Skip, you do a lot of stuff, as I said at the beginning, that is the first of its kind, so acting for individuals, private individuals who now take on astronaut missions. So what challenges are there in drafting something for the first time? How do we overcome that, and how important is it? I think you've hinted already, very important, that your general knowledge of international and national space law fits into that. But it's really drafting a contract for a one-off thing. How does that work? How do you do that?
Well, first of all, it's fun. I really like doing that, taking, a private astronaut contract and working all the waivers and everything like that. But I'm right now I'm working on multiple contracts for on-orbit servicing. These are things that won't be happening for years, but we're negotiating the contracts now, and that it takes a little imagination. But one of the things I try to do is to look for analogies, things that are terrestrial. I'll give one example, because this was the first one of the first things I did in my space law career at Space Command. I mean, I had Air Force sent me to McGill. I had an LLM in space law. I thought I knew everything, and I'm sitting in my office, and a colonel walks in one day. And this was back in the mid 80s. This is when they were just starting the GPS system. So that dates me a little bit, but one of the issues back then was what they called selective availability. GPS started out as a military system, and the question was, are we going to give this to all the civilian users, or are we going to degrade the signal, perhaps? I had a colonel walk into my office one day and said, Major Smith, what happens if we degrade the signal and a plane flies into a mountain? I said, oh, well, that's a good, they didn't teach me that at McGill. But I thought, well, okay, what's something that's analogous to that? And I thought, okay, what about Coast Guard supposed to maintain lighthouses, navigational buoys, things like that? What if they, do something, in a perhaps a negligent manner, or, something that causes an accident? What happens there? So I researched that, and I did my memo and gave it to the colonel.
And the rest is history, because we've all used GPS, and planes don't crash into mountains as a result of GPS. So thanks to you, I think the world owes you a great gratitude. Deepika, because you've done so many of them, that commercial transactions are different for space. And so why is it necessary, do you think, that we create unique tools for space contracts? And are those tools different and appropriate both for large players like Airbus, for example, and for small actors? No doubt you negotiate with them. And that's something that more and more commercial lawyers have to deal with, is educating, and I use that word again selectively, educating governments, particularly the procurement side. If the government wants to procure a satellite, they don't know anything about cross waivers and all of those sorts of things. And you really have to educate them about the uniqueness of space. So how do you do that? What are the challenges there for you, and why do we need to do
that? I think that there are several interesting things at play. One is, and maybe Skip can add over there, the time that I stepped into the industry, I felt that there were already things changing where big players had to learn to work with smaller players. Or rather, I should use the word older players versus younger players in that sense. And whether we are talking about the nature of the contracts or the tools, they can be adopted from other industries. So if we look at commercial transactions in the space industry, they have quite a lot of technical requirements, and these are comparable to the oil and gas industry or the mining industry in Australia, for instance. And there are provisions that specifically, of course, deal with authorization, safety, export control, IP, or risk allocation. And these have relevance depending on the type of activity the contract deals with, or the applicable national space legislation. For example, contracts that deal with crewed missions might have a larger emphasis on safety as opposed to robotic missions. And when we are talking about research contracts that are publicly funded, there's quite a big focus on how the results of the research are used and disseminated, and what sort of rights a research institution gets versus the industry would get. So there are specifics that depend on the context of the contract itself. Given this field, we see these younger players coming in. And what I find interesting is with most of these startups, the first people that they hire are definitely not lawyers. They are engineers, there are financial experts, and these people negotiate contracts also with the older space companies. And let's bring into this equation a government actor who's also part of the contract. You have very unbalanced power dynamics in this contract. And one of the tools that we need to use there is how can we make the contract more user-friendly? So we are talking about, when we look at space contracts, they are 80 to several hundred pages long. They are full of legalese, whereas the activities in the contract are to be managed by engineers or non-law specialists. So we need to, as you said earlier, we need to be able to speak the same language and somehow encode that simplified practical version in a contract that's usable and not just signed off and then put inside a drawer. So that's something that we need to work with. And I think legal design thinking, so having this user-centric approach, is definitely an attitude as well as a tool that we need to make more use of, particularly in terms of how they are used with governments when they procure things. And I think Skip can add quite a lot here. One of the first tasks that I did when I started this job was looking at US federal acquisition regulations. And one needs to have a lot of time to just read that, to understand that, and translate that into things that make sense for your team. Why do we have these rules and regulations? Why is it necessary for the products or services that we are offering? And I think that's somewhere the governments need to reflect and see how they can bring about a change. And I'm not saying that all government contracts need to change. I think the role of the government in that particular relationship should be assessed. Are they a user? Are they a developer or an investor of sorts? Or do they have a different role? And then we need to completely stop, in my opinion, this blanket application of procurement rules. That's definitely not optimal. We should look into simplifying information, making sure it's easy for both older and younger space players to be compliant, to understand the processes, to bring clarity and transparency into the work that they do and raise awareness. And maybe that way we can change Torsten's mind about space lawyers as well. Work as a team, we make things simple.
That is a goal worth pursuing. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, but of course, governments do not change their thinking. Governments are risk averse, particularly if you're in these days of massive procurement projects. You know, we're seeing it in Australia, for example, but also all over the place about sovereign capability. And so, yes, I agree. We've got to take people along with us. Skip, you deal with
Steven,
governments all the time.
Can I jump
ahead.
in there?
Yeah,
because
you
know, those points are right on. But there is change, because governments change very slowly. But what you do see, for example, in NASA, instead of using the Federal Acquisition Regulation that I'm sure you love so much, Deepika, you know, they're using for most of their space contracts now what they call Space Act agreements, and it's commercial procurement. So they avoid a lot of the requirements, you know, hard bids, things like that. So you can, Department of Defense, the Air Force is using what they call OTAs, or other transaction authority. instead of the Federal Acquisition Regulation and the Defense FAR Supplement, which is another, book that big. And then you have Space Command now that's using different forms of procurement, mostly based on OTAs. So they're moving away. They've kind of learned their lesson, and I think they had to, because what they saw in the commercial world was things were moving so fast. I mean, look at the last 10 years compared to the 10 years before that, and even now, I mean, the next 10 years is going to be even faster. So the governments, agencies that are involved in space had to adapt, and they had to adapt their contracting practices. So, and that's a really important part of space law. And I think it's not just the U.S. I think it's many other countries. I'm hoping you're seeing that as well as in Europe. But I think governments just have to be more commercially oriented, buy commercial off-the-shelf stuff when they can, and they're buying cheaper satellites, but more of them, so they can, in the aggregate, accomplish a similar mission. Anyway, that's my thoughts on government.
I agree. I completely agree. And of course, there's a trend also towards minimal public-private partnerships, and that in itself adds the complexities. You're right. So, Skip, what about national space law here? I mean, we heard from Deepika before about the US regulations, which, every time I read, my hair gets grayer and grayer. Plain English would be wonderful, right? But many countries want to encourage their commercial space sector, but they are cautious. But they want to introduce, or they need to introduce, as both of you have said, enabling national laws, right, to enable innovation, entrepreneurship, all of those things. So, how does that work? How do governments balance the need for the global and broad vision together with of entrepreneurship and economy with the international space treaties? Where does national law fit into all of this?
Yeah, well, space is international, really, by its nature. There's very little that happens that's of a significant scope that is just national, But you again, you come back to the Outer Space Treaty. You've got freedom of use that includes commercial uses, and you've got Article 6. So states are responsible for the activities of their entities. So, and to some extent, they need the national space laws to protect them, because they have to authorize and supervise the space activities of their entities. So, for example, in the U.S., we have licensing of launches and returns by the FAA. That's the United States authorizing and supervising commercial space activities. In the U.S., there's a major debate now on in-orbit activities, novel space activities that the National Space Council is looking at. They're supposed to issue a report probably around March that our good friend Diane Howard is kind of shepherding through that process. So there will be probably in the near future, I don't know whether it's this year, next year, whatever, there'll probably be an agency identified in the U.S. to regulate on-orbit services, because it's not specifically regulated now. So you need the national laws both to protect the nation, but you also need the national laws to enable commercial space activities. You need to protect the intellectual property. You need to enable the financing of space activities and security interests and satellites, so that you can get investments. So it all works together pretty well. And it's amazing that this old outer space treaty with very broad general principles can have worked in that manner to encourage space to have national space laws. And now we have so many nations with national space laws, some of those thanks to you, Stephen.
Well, you know, I love it that you keep referring back to our dear friend, the Outer Space Treaty, because it's just important that we reinforce that, you know, there is this interaction between those fundamental principles and everything else that goes on, down to, as my dear wife Donna would say, the grubby commercial side of space as well, although I don't think it's grubby, you know, but those principles that we hold so high are relevant to the work you do, both of you, Deepika and Skip, do every day. And, you know, I just think that's such an important message. So Deepika, given all of this, you know, how exciting it is, there's this sort of philosophical question, you know, space is becoming increasingly commercialized. We hear all of that, more and more private sector involvement. How does that fit in with the philosophy of these fundamental principles? I know they're helpful in the work you do, but could we argue, playing devil's advocate, that having more and more commercial private sector players is an opportunity? And I've asked this question in previous breakfasts as well. An opportunity for greater cooperation in space for peaceful purposes. But of course, you know, private sector wants to make money. They've got a different bottom line perspective. Their goals are not necessarily in sync with the grander ideas of the Outer Space Treaty. So could it be argued that the more we become commercialized, the more that actually, rather than an opportunity, presents obstacles in terms of cooperation for the benefit of humankind? I think I know which way you will swing, given who you work with, but you know, how do you feel about that?
I think, as any good lawyer would say, my answer is it depends.
No, not good enough. Not good enough.
Personally, I think for me, it was always a challenge working on one side, for example, with my NGO with a human rights base, and hearing in lectures and in conferences about how space benefits humankind. I couldn't see that happening sometimes. The ground reality was that I couldn't see how space translates to benefiting humankind directly. Having said that, I don't think commercialization is just evil or grubby in that sense. There's definitely a role for all of these different stakeholders who are present in our industry, and the private sector especially. Today, not just in our industry, but in general, the private sector, they don't operate alone. So other than, so you have your shareholders, but you also have other stakeholders towards whom this private entity is accountable, or who have a say in how the activities of the private entity are carried out. So I think there are definitely opportunities to foster cooperation in several ways. And I go back to one of the first discussions we had about understanding the context in which we operate. So understanding the social needs, understanding the cultural needs. And the minute you do that while you're engaged in private space activities, I think there's definitely value that you can add to the industry, but also the people within the region that you work with. To give you an example, I see that in Europe, there are several startups that are now working on very practical aspects of using space technology. How can we look into land use management? How can we monitor our supply chain? And also in India, one of my favorite startups, they combine space data with other data to provide inputs to fishermen in the region, which I don't think anybody else would have thought about, to say, okay, let's use space for the benefit of fisherfolk in our community. So I definitely think there's a lot of good that can come out of it. Having said that, I think there must also be enough checks and balances to ensure that the bottom line is not the only driver for business. And that's quite important. There are a few other younger space players who say, hey, we are regulatory orphans. We can go about doing different things. We are going to launch lasers into space. We can do all sorts of things. And there I would say, take a bit of time, use caution, see what you want to do, why you want to do this, and then proceed with those activities.
Your word, and it makes perfect sense. Okay, before we move to the reality check, because I'm sure Torsten has a lot to say, I just want to ask both of you. So we're talking about the behavior of the private sector, and we heard Deepika's really important words there. Skip, if there was one element of commercial sector behavior that you think is essential, for the ongoing safety and stability, security, sustainability of space, what is that behavior that we must instill into the private sector, and how do we perhaps incentivize them to adhere to that? What's really important here?
Well, on the commercial side, I think it's got to be kind of the sanctity of the contract, the enforceability, whether it's in a country and you're going to the courts in that country to enforce it, or if it's international and you're using one of the international dispute resolution processes, you got to be able to enforce the contract, and because parties know that the contract can be enforced, they tend to honor the contract and follow it, So I think that makes the commercial sector move in the right direction, whether it's national or international contracts.
Yeah, enforceability, but adherence to it, I think, really important. Deepika, what do you think?
For me, it would be having the focus on impact as much or more than the focus on growth. And I say this from different perspectives. So if it doesn't matter what sort of commercial activities you're engaged in, if you say, this is something that I want to do, let's say I want to put several humans on Mars or on Moon, what is the impact of that? How is that contributing to the principles identified in the Outer Space Treaty or to the context that you've built for yourself? The question why is not being asked enough by the different stakeholders in our industry. And I think it's important we do that to assess the impact, not just to check boxes in terms of ESG and sustainability and so on, but also really what is the impact on our industry, what is the impact on our workforce and the larger society. And I think there's an inherent incentive for everybody to look into that, because then we try to make our industry, let's say, less toxic if we can. Not that it is toxic, but if it grows out to be something, then at least it's less toxic.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I've been to quite a few international fora where we talk about the future, and the innovators and the entrepreneurs who are amazing, but they're always saying, we'll just develop the technology and humanity will follow. But I think what we're all saying is, well, let's see what humanity really needs and shape our activities and shape that technology around it as much as possible. I know it sounds idealistic, but I think it's really important. So thank you. Okay, Torsten, everybody's waiting for you to pour scorn on three space lawyers here. You've heard how important the commercial sector is. You speak to everybody, all the commercial players, you know them. What is your sense? What are their priorities? Are they happy to adhere to responsible behavior, even if perhaps that reduces their potential for revenues? Or do you think they'll carry on maximizing their profits without really considering either enforceability or impact. Where do you think the commercial sector, how would they respond to what we've heard from Skip and Deepika?
That's your question?
That's my question.
That's
easy.
Come on. Well, first thing I would like to say, I do respect and I love space lawyers. So if that has a different notion, no, not at all. No. And you know that. So second point, you talked about the commercial market and the impact. And until the last minute, nobody used the word sustainability in that. And I think that is the link to the quite complex questions, which I'm not able to answer within the next minutes, but I try my best. Space, climate change, Green Deal, CO2 certificates, they all have a good intention, as we, I think, all agree. But if we see the reality, how they are used, then it's widely broad, to say it with respect. It is a business at the end of the day, and following the flow of the money is here very important. I think in this sector more, and space sector more than ever. I mean, when we go to the food sector or the agricultural sector, then we know we as consumers buying the product and so on and so forth. In space, it's different. In space, we still have, even it's a whatever the latest numbers are, 450 billion market or something like that, and we are reaching the 1 trillion, and everyone is having dollar signs in their eyes, or respectively euro signs, if you like to have it.
Australian dollar, but
what is that?
The Australian dollar. We call it the Pacific peso sometimes. That's right.
But space is paid by the government in large scale. So I think even companies state, and many of them have their statement, their regulation, and their policies in place, that they do it for a wider good, that they do it for the benefit of humanity, to save the planet, and whatever nice wordings we will find there, and eloquent wordings we will find there, at the end of the day, it's the money that counts. And that is, and I'm absolute with Deepika, and I love your sense you put into the discussion, that it's not all white and shiny and great and super duper, and we all love rockets, no doubt about it. Yeah, but we have to ask ourselves, hey, is it really something what we should pursue for the future in that way, in that speed, with this material, with these resources, with X, Y, Z? Is that good? And these questions are not enough asked today. I mean, I'm coming from the European Space Conference the last days in Brussels, where the top leaders of Europe, from the agencies, from the corporates, from the government, from the EU Parliament, from ESA, came together and talked. And something is very clear. I mean, Europe and space, that is nice. That is a nice relationship. And with our now 17 billion budget for ESA for the upcoming 3 years, it's nice. It's much more than we had before. Great. But it's a fraction of the market in the US. And nobody knows the real numbers, but it's also a fraction of what happens in China. So Europe is behind on that. So big, and the governments will do everything to enable the market, the industry, to keep up, because we are talking about independence, sovereignty, access to space, all these big words, but they mean money, and they forgot usually the sustainability aspect that we desperately need to continue our business even in space. I mean, we don't have to argue amongst each other here, because I think we all are aware of that. If we trash up or mess up with the space or the orbits, then it might be not accessible. Maybe yes. Maybe we come to a point that we have in the climate change debate, that we have to accept it, that it's there, and have to adapt to the new normal. But I'm too old to accept that, honestly. I don't want to adapt to a wrong system, coming from a wrong system, obviously, geopolitically. And I know I don't answer your question or in detail, but I said what I want to say.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting, and thank you, Torsten. You know, the sustainability question is so important because in the end, you know, the private sector is not going to make money in space if space is not sustainable. You know,
but Steven, that's my problem. That's my honest problem. If you use the word sustainable to maintain your business, something is wrong. That's it. That's, for me, is a wrong order. I want to keep it. I want to keep a forest clean. I want to keep the air clean because I believe in that. We need that, and not because I want to make money with that further on. And that's my problem in this statement, that I want to turn it a different way.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think we all agree, but we all have to recognize that you know, perhaps when you talk to a lot of the major space commercial players, still they have to survive. You know, they need contracts, they need revenues. Deepika, please help us, help us on this debate. Deepika, yeah.
I love everything about Torsten's remarks on it, and I try to go back to the discussion that we've already had. From a commercial perspective, to start with, I think there is money. Enough experts have told us there is money in being sustainable as well, whether it's running the business sustainably or building products and services that are sustainable in itself. I think one of the key problems that I personally noticed at international space conferences and discussions is that there's quite a lot of focus on the technology aspect of it and not enough on the other elements that go with it. We could start with financing, having enough financial awareness, having enough awareness about the local context of where people work in, and so on. For instance, in India, one of the key uses of space data, or let's say Earth observation products and services, would be managing disasters and looking at our environmental and land use. But is that a priority of the government, who is the biggest, let's say, who's the largest customer or the largest funding agency for most space companies? That's something that's questionable. And I think to the general aspect of sustainability, what I notice, even if I'm just talking to a group of other colleagues, everybody has a different opinion or a different idea of what sustainability means. Yeah. And I'm yet to be in a discussion where we talk about first, what is sustainability to you? And how are we then going to find out the challenges that come out of what sustainability means to you, and then look into solving the problems? So I think there are several steps we need to take towards that. We probably don't have the time for it, but I really, really hope that in future conferences and debates and so on, that these non-technical topics are given as much importance as the technical advances and developments and so on.
Great, I completely agree. Skip,
next generation.
Yeah, Skip, your thoughts.
Well, I think the growing interest in sustainability is driving a segment of the commercial space market. Like I say, I'm writing contracts for on-orbit refueling. Okay, and for servicing of satellites, and to grab a satellite and send it back into the Earth's atmosphere or send it out. I mean, it is a commercial industry now. They're we're writing the contracts for it, and they're getting investment dollars. There's people investing in that, and most of it is driven by sustainability. So it would be nice if we had far more rules and regulations that encourage sustainability, but it's happening. It's a commercial sector right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the way I see it is we've got to create an environment of a win-win situation, right? Because that's how I think we progress. The stick approach doesn't work. The carrot approach is better, although it hasn't worked in climate change. But let me give you an example from work I'm doing. So, as you know, I'm involved with the working group on space resources. And there's so much discussion and focus on the exploration side and the exploitation side. Of course, the member states of COCOS will work out the rules. But there's no discussion about, when you talk to mining companies on Earth, they've got an exploration division, they've got an exploitation division, but they've also got a rehabilitation division, trying to look at the environmental consequences and there's no discussion, it's just beginning at that international level on that aspect. And here's the win-win, right? We've got to do that. We've got to think. We've got to change our thinking to look at environmental consequences and sustainability and all of those issues. But it also does, Torsten, represent an opportunity because the private sector has the technological capability. And if you can demonstrate to them, this is important, we need it. And if you get it right, well, there's lots of work. So I think we've got to create win-win situations, but it's difficult because it is a change in mindset. Torsten, I'm conscious we've got lots of questions and we're already at the hour. So, we could go on about this issue, but let's see, Torsten, what we should respond to from the audience.
Absolutely. I agree with you that can go for quite some time. So we have a number of people that coming in with their questions, and I'm very grateful for them. I will read them out, and if you can try to get short answers. I know it's not that possible for all of them. So Gunjan, thank you very much for joining us and for your question. Do you find that policy development is impacting commercial space contracts? And how does that regional laws come into play, EU versus US?
Skip?
Yeah, I think that's for me. Well, I think on the policy development, it's just what we were just talking about. There's policy being developed on space traffic management, sustainability, and that is driving commercial space activity and contracts. With respect to government, where'd that question go? In most commercial contracts, you define what the governing law is. And so it might be New York law, even if it's a contract with Airbus, but I do find that the dispute resolution provisions on international contracts are usually very different than if it's just a Colorado company and a California company. It's typically going to be international arbitration of some flavor if it's an international contract. So, but you're going to choose a law. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
Sure.
Mark, thank you very much for getting up that early and for your wonderful question. I think that's the one for Deepika. Where should be the interface between the industry interest for a free use and the government duties for responsible space activities? Come on, that's an easy one.
I was just about to say that's a tricky one. But I would say freedom comes with responsibility anyway. So I think there are quite a lot of governmental contracts or government-funded, let's say, programs where an interface already exists. Like I say, if it is public research, there is an obligation also on industries to one, allow for publication of information so that it goes out there. There's a multiplier effect on your research results and so on. And there's enough protection or enough room for the industry to make use of the results. In Europe, for instance, you have these Horizon programs where I remember one of the interesting intellectual property clauses is if an industry does not use the result in the optimal manner or in an optimal manner, which can be anything, there is room for the European Union to revoke the license that the industry gets. So that way there is a sort of check and balance that's embedded in the program, that's part of the contract that we all sign up to. And I think there should be more such interfaces, just in simpler and in more transparent manners, so that different stakeholders can join such programs.
I agree. Yeah.
I would like to take one final question, and I see there's a few more remarks on the chat, and I can't let you go without giving you this question from Chris. Practically, concretely, would you agree that in addition to international space law and national law, there's a need for a third layer of norms, standards, and best practices at operators and relevant stakeholders level? Another easy one. I mean,
I have the answer to that. Yes.
Okay. 42. Yeah.
Yes. But to an extent, we already have that. We have industry standards that are sometimes called out in contracts, sometimes not, but they still, they might be a reference document, things like that. But we do have a lot of industry standards that are applicable, and so and we definitely need them. So that is, I think it's fair to characterize that as kind of a third layer of requirements there. Yeah.
Okay.
Deepika, do you have something to add there?
Nothing to add there. I think just an example, the European Space Agency procurement regulations already embed some of these ISO standards for debris management and so on. So yes, there is a layer, and I think we will eventually come up with more of those.
Yeah, and of course, if I can just throw in my 2 cents worth, as we know, just as we speak, there's discussions in Geneva of looking at one aspect of, norms of behavior, responsible behavior for threats and security related issues. I think all of that is really important. My point is, we already have these incredible layers of law at the international and national level, and all of those additional norms, that third layer that you're talking about, that Skip and Deepika are talking about, all of that's important, but it builds on the existing law. Let's not forget that the starting point, I'm always saying this, the starting point is always that framework, and these norms should build on, augment, strengthen those fundamental principles. And I think that is a recognition. But yes, there's certainly need for more and more norms, standards, best practices that will help us move in the right direction. Absolutely. But getting there is hard sometimes.
That's right.
So thanks everybody for your questions. I think we're out of time like always, Torsten, but we'll certainly look to answer those questions offline, the ones that are sent through. Yeah.
Good. Yeah,
so back to you, Elena.
Elena. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm here back to you with a full set of next events. So join us later today, on the 26th of January at 4 p.m. After a good nap for all those attending from continental Europe. We have our Space Café Israel by Meidat Pariente with his guest Ram Levi discussing about cybersecurity for space missions. And later at 8 p.m. we are going to be at the Space Bar, the 60th Space Bar by Astro Agency. And then on the 27th of January at 6 p.m. tomorrow, we have our Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West with her guest Brian Galan in a conversation about Canadian space innovation. On the 31st of January at 4 p.m. join us for our Space Café 33 Minutes with Markus Fritz if you want to hear about mobility and space. And on the 1st of February at 4 p.m. We have our Space Café Black Ops by Dr. Emma Gatti, continuing the series with Dr. Namrata Goswami. And on the 2nd of February at 6 p.m. Join us for Space Café Italy by Dr. Emma Gatti again. This one I have to mention is going to be in Italian. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite. As always, we would love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily and bi-weekly newsletters. And if you'd like to treat yourselves with something special, become a Space Watcher today. And your support will really help us. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. I know, but we need your support to continue our work. So thank you all very much for your interest today. Thank you, Deepika and Skip, for our inspiring chat and for being our guests. Steven, thank you. Have you been happy with the program?
Oh, I'd be very happy. Deepika and Skip, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great discussion, and of course we could have gone on for hours and hours, but I think you've been both inspiring and cautious, and Torsten, you've been ambiguous, and I suppose I've been intergenerational, but thank you so much, Deepika and Skip. Your thoughts are really helpful, and we loved it, and so thank you.
Steven, we promised our audience to talk about the next one.
Yes. So everybody, we have the Space Law Breakfast, as you know, the fourth, well, you probably don't know, but we have it on the fourth Thursday of every second month. It just so happens the fourth Thursday in March is smack bam in the middle of legal subcommittee in Vienna. And so Torsten and I are scheming away to do some sort of special event during legal subcommittee. I think, Torsten, more details will be forthcoming. And then we'll be back to our normal format of Space Law Cafe Breakfast in May again, and I'll have two fantastic guests again to be advised. But please come and join us. Come and join all the wonderful events that Torsten and his team have. And thank you again, Deepika and Skip. It's been fantastic, and I hope we can continue the conversation. So Torsten, from me, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we just lost Eleanor. Her internet connection got cut. So Trento went back to sleep. So it remains for me then to say thank you for joining us, and hope you all have a great week. In the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and yeah, see you later in Israel then, when Meidat Pariente will talk with Ram Levi, again, cybersecurity at its best. So and they will be also at the Israeli Space Week, Skip, next week. Good. So check out.
I'll look for him. Thanks. It's been
Thank
fun.
you. Okay.
Thank you, guys. And hey, everyone else, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. Of course. Yes.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.